I'm going to start my recording. I have a couple of backups in case we have a situation. Technology is all fun and games until somebody gets hurt, right? Okay, I'm going to, okay. Oops, see, I almost hit the wrong button. I almost hit the end button instead of the record button. Uh-oh.
Is the N button like the N word, or is it a different thing?
And E-N-D.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, you're telling me elocution. I gotta work on my enunciation. Okay, I got the message. I got it. I heard you. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna start the recording. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so pleased to have the distinguished producers and historians from Driving While Black, Race, Space, and Mobility in America to join us for a film discussion. I hope that you had the opportunity to view it on your PBS station, but fear not, if you didn't, it will be re-airing. Also, you should be aware that there's a book on which this is based, and I will give you more information about that shortly. So we are joined tonight by Dr. Gretchen Sorin, by Emir Lewis, and by Emily Pfeil. Unfortunately, Rick Burns was not able to join us, but we are so happy to have Emily just step up. So just a few notes for everyone. Again, sound will be muted throughout the program, except for the panelists. We're recording the program and we're going to post it as soon as possible on our YouTube channel. We have some advanced questions from the registration form, so we'll begin with those. But this is an opportunity for our audience to ask questions of the filmmakers. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A tool or the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. If you experience any technical difficulties, you may want to log off and then log back in. But again, we're recording the program, so if you can't rejoin for any reason, you'll be able to hopefully view it at a later date. So I think that covers all of our housekeeping issues. Again, please send questions and comments through the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gretchen Sorin. Dr. Sorin holds a BA degree from Rutgers University in American Studies, an MA in Museum Studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program, and a PhD from Albany University in History. She is Director and Distinguished Professor of the Cooperstown Graduate Program. Dr. Sorin has more than 30 years of experience as a museum consultant, working for more than 250 museums. She has served as an exhibition guest curator for many major exhibitions, including In the Spirit of Martin, The Living Legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for the Smithsonian Institution, Traveling Exhibition Service, Through the Eyes of Others, African Americans and Identity in American Art, and Bridges and Boundaries, African Americans and American Jews for the Jewish Museum in New York, among others. Dr. Sorin writes and lectures frequently on African American history and museum practice. The research for her most recently published book, Driving While Black, African American Travel and the Road to Civil Rights, forms the basis for the scholarship for this film and explores the role the automobile played in the lives of African Americans during the Jim Crow era, the way that African Americans expressed middle-class American values through car ownership, and how cars helped change deeply entrenched racial etiquette. Piscataway Public Library has several copies of the book, as well as several print copies, as well as
Did we lose Joy?
I think Joy is frozen.
Looks like we may have frozen a little bit. Let me pick up a little bit just where she left off. In addition to print copies of the book available, Piscataway Public Library also has a downloadable audiobook available through Hoopla, one of our 3 digital content platforms. And if you'll just bear with me for a moment, I will look into what should be coming next. So please hold.
And I see some people are asking about the screenings and airing again. And actually it's available for free on PBS. So if you just search PBS Driving While Black, it should come up and it should be free and available for viewing, I think, for the next few weeks.
Indeed. I think I might be swift enough on the internet to actually post that in the chat.
I have that link handy, so I can share that as
Oh,
well.
wonderful.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
So
I had actually been trying to look up the rebroadcast on NJTV, but it kept bringing me to Metro Focus as opposed to the actual program. Gretchen, I believe you and Rick did a thing on Metro Focus.
Yes.
Yes, so it kept bringing me
But
to
you can,
that.
I did find the link on pbs.org.
Yes, yes, agreed.
And it's my recollection from just a couple minutes ago that Joy was just finishing up Dr. Soren's introduction. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So as she was mentioning, that title is available from the library. If you have not read it or are interested in it, please stop by, pick up a copy. We'll move on to introducing the other panelists. We have Emir Lewis, and Emir has built an exceptional editing career over the years. His credits span documentaries and narrative genres, beginning with Slam, a 1998 film, which received both the prestigious Sundance Grand Jury Prize and the Cannes Camera d'Or. Most recently, he has parlayed his editorial experience into a supervising story producer role for the acclaimed Netflix docu-series Rapture. In between filmmaking projects, Emir also teaches the fine art of storytelling at both NYU and Brooklyn College's Feinstein Graduate School. And then we'll talk very briefly about Emily, and we will move into the question and answer, which is why everyone has joined us tonight. Emily joined Steeplechase Films in 2017 and has worked on VA, The Human Cost of War, a 2017 film, The Chinese Exclusion Act, a 2018 film, and has served as associate producer for Oliver Sacks' His Own Life, a 2019 film. She is producing several upcoming Rick Burns films, including the Alaska Film Project and New York, The Future of Cities. She graduated with a master's degree in museum studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program and is also a graduate of the Honors College at the University of Albany. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. So hopefully everyone or most of our attendees have been able to see the film. I certainly did last night, and really really wonderfully put together production, I thought, covering some very sobering topics. So our first question we have here is from Alita. She writes, I love that you were able to add very recent events related to Driving While Black. How much of a crunch was it to bring it completely up to date, as I imagine your documentary was already complete?
I'll take that because it falls under the auspices of editing, which was my primary. Little easier than you think because about life. And I said very early on that when we were starting to weave the end together, where we knew we were always going to come up to 2019, 2020. And I believe originally we had the incident in Phoenix, because that was the latest horrible thing. Hello, Joy, welcome back. But I said in reality, we should just leave a 40-second hole at the end, because there will be another one, and another one, and sadly, another one. So incorporating Jacob Blake into the end of the film was relatively easy, because we had provisionally already accounted for the latest atrocity, the latest, sort of state-sanctioned assassination of a Black motorist. So in that sense, it was pretty easy because we were ready for it, we were prepared for it, and we just sort of inserted it into it. What we were not prepared for was Jacob Blake's sister's incredibly eloquent speech, where she sort of encapsulated a lot of things that we were talking about in our film, where she went back and sort of tied her brother's shooting to her larger family, sort of connecting herself to the larger Black American experience and saying, I'm not sad because this has happened to my family before. It happened to my family, Emmett Till. It happened to my family, Sandra Bland, et cetera, et cetera. So we weren't prepared for that. And that was like a sort of a hallelujah moment, like, thank goodness for this incredibly eloquent young woman. But the concept of a 2020 experience, that we were ready for. Joy, are you taking over the questions?
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry about that. I don't know who asked what question, so I
Kathleen asked a question from Alita, I believe.
okay.
Alita Crawley.
Okay. Oh, good. Well, thank you. So is that from the question and answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So unfortunately, when I got kicked out, I seem to have lost all the questions that were previously in the Q&A chat. So
They've all
Kathleen,
been answered.
oh, okay. So did we get the ones from the advanced questions already as well?
No, I think we can start in on them shortly.
We only did one question.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I'm sorry. Technical difficulties. I thought if I was just doing this in the office, I wouldn't have those technical difficulties, but oh well. So let me.
I have the questions here, Joy.
Okay. Yes. Can you please? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Hazel Witherspoon asks, how has work on this topic changed you? And that sounds like a good question for all the panelists.
Well, I'll start.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I would say that, in some ways it makes me more angry, and it makes me more afraid for my children and my grandchildren, and it makes me more determined to do something about it than I was before. When I started as a historian, I was really thinking about this project in a different way. I was thinking about it historically and the role of the automobile for African Americans in the 20th century. And then as more and more African Americans were murdered and we started to see it on, everybody's carrying around their own movie camera now. And we started to see it, it became much more immediate. And I think when Emir came into the project and he started that drumbeat of, this has to be of the moment. We have to bring it up to the present. And in the beginning, Rick and I were talking about making it much less, like we were going to leave the ending so that people would make the connections themselves. And I think we all decided with Emir's prodding and advice and guidance that no, it really had to come up to the very minute. And I totally agree with that. So I think it changed us all, and it made us all really determined to do what we can do to stop it. Although, I think we're all a little bit frustrated by what's going on in the country. So I'll let Emily and Emir answer the question as well.
Yeah, definitely what Gretchen said. I think it started when I first started on the project in 2017. We really thought it was going to be more based in history and more Jim Crow era. And we quickly realized that we had to connect it very, very deeply to the present. And I think being white and growing up in a predominantly upstate New York white town, I think this was a lot of new information for me. And I think this was something where we wanted to make sure we could connect with all audiences and really help people understand and be more empathetic to the issues that are going on. And I mean, we never realized how timely this would become, especially, we all talked about it. I mean, back in March when the pandemic really hit, we all also sat with how immobile we all were, and just how that kind of changed our perspectives as well in finishing up the film. And I think, yeah, it's been an incredible learning experience for me through every piece of it. I had the opportunity to go on most of the shoots and meet some incredible people. Our interviewees are absolutely phenomenal. A lot of them Gretchen found and we found along the way. And, you know, just meeting them and hearing them speak and sharing their stories, it has been incredible and totally invaluable. And it is so interesting because I think you come to documentaries a lot of the time to hear historians speak on something that they have heavily researched and that they are experts in, but not always hear their personal stories. And this was a really interesting film because we got both from almost every interviewee. So, you know, they shared their nuggets of knowledge about what they've learned and what they've researched, but also were able to share their personal experiences and what they share with their families and that fear. And that was really just so eye-opening and emotional. I mean, the end of the film with Christopher West, that interview, you know, blew us away when we were shooting, and then we kind of were like, this has got to be the end of the film. And obviously there's a few bits that come after it now, but that was an easy decision because it just really cut so deep. And you know, we're hoping that connects with people, you know, all people. And I think this is a really important story for white people to tune into and understand, because we're not always taught this, and this is something that really needs to be taught and people need to understand.
I wish I could say that that I was deeply and profoundly changed in regards to America's response to Black pain and suffering, but no, not really changed in that regard. What I think changed me the most was trying to solve that on screen. I think knowing that, showing a very early screening of the film to an audience in Martha's Vineyard at the like a work in progress screening, the Martha's Vineyard Film Festival, let me know that we cannot inundate people with pain and suffering and pain and more pain and suffering without some sort of, at first I was like, we need to diminish it. I was like, no, maybe we need to counterbalance it. And Emily and Sophia Santana and like who are our archival producers were able to find and give us access, or give me access to, an incredible swath of home movies, both the Southside home movies.
Southside Home Movie Project, yeah.
Yes, and the African American Home Movie Archive, and the Smithsonian. Although we have this debate, not even a debate. Everybody else on our team calls it the National Museum of African American
History and Culture.
Something.
NAMAC.
Yes, NAMAC. Yeah, and I refuse to call it that because I call it the Blacksonian, which just sort of rolls off the tongue a little bit better. So they had an incredible treasure trove of home movies as well. And between showing you lynching photos and showing you, really aggressive cell phone video of confrontations between Black people and the police, we were able to sort of balance that off with incredible moments of Black joy and families just being families, and living, existing, sleeping, eating, all that stuff that Herb Boyd says in the beginning of the film. And that was, so I can't tamp down the violence, but I can sort of, do this on the scales where we give you these moments where people are breathing and being. And so that sort of changed me. Those joyful moments really changed me.
Well, and I think you can't really, it's very much the same process when you're working on an exhibition. You can't do an exhibition or a film where you just leave people in total misery and hopeless. You can't do that.
Right.
It's just not. When you feel hopeless, you can't act. You can't do anything. You're not motivated. It's hopeless. So you have to give people hope. And I think one of the things, Joy, and you and I were talking when I first got on, about the fact that there are actually a few funny moments in the film. There are moments when you really chuckle, and when the people who are talking laugh. They may be laughing at some pretty horrific events, like Uncle Walter, Walter Edwards, who tells that wonderful story about going into a restaurant and they play this this record that encourages him to get out of town really quickly, and he's laughing. And so you have to have, I think, those moments in a film like this, and so that people know that the spirits of these people have not been broken.
Right. I mean, in some ways, that's a classic Shakespearean device, right? Like every single gory scene that takes place in a Shakespearean play, whether it be, Macbeth or Othello, is followed with a comedy scene right after it. Because I think Shakespeare sort of understood his audience is like, it's a play, it's theater, so it's probably not going to be as gory as our modern day movies. But if I was going to show death on stage, then I had to bring the audience back down, and give them a little bit of something to laugh with before some other information. So it's good enough for the bard, it's good enough for us. So.
Great, thank you all so much. We have a couple people with their hand raised, so I just want to see if they would like the opportunity to kind of take the stage for a moment to ask their question aloud. One is Abigail Sanner. So Abigail, I'm going to allow you to talk. I'll be asking you to unmute, so you should get the option to unmute on your device. And while we're waiting for that, another participant, Kelly, has also raised her hand. So Kelly, I'm going to allow you to talk and ask you to unmute as well. And we'll see. This is our first time trying this out. We recently upgraded our software to include the webinar version. So it looks like Kelly has unmuted. Kelly, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Oh, okay. Abigail said she asked her question in the chat. We're not hearing from Kelly. So at this point, I think we can move along to one of our Q&A questions, and we'll leave the option open for Kelly after the next question. So we have Sabrina asking, how was it to get people, especially the elderly, to speak about their negative experiences? Do they feel like times are regressing back to what they had previously experienced?
I think at least for me, being on these interviews, I think the first thing is you really have to make people comfortable and be in a space where they can share these things, because it's really hard to share. And actually, when I was at my grad program with Gretchen, we learned about oral histories and being able to ask the right questions and try to go a little deeper. And we were so thrilled to be able to interview, Leah Chase and Walter Edwards and Yvette and Ellis Marsalis. And we just felt so lucky to be able to be in touch with these people and really ask them their stories. I think it's difficult, and Gretchen, you can speak more to this, but I think there's also that element of, you want to protect your family and you want to protect yourself. And sometimes these stories weren't shared. And, for the sake of the film, we wanted those moments to be shared, but it was really important, to be very respectful about it. And I think, I don't know, it just kind of is an organic process. And I think everyone we interviewed was so moved by the story we were trying to tell. And luckily, it is such an important project and people really understood that from the get-go. So it was really remarkably easy to get people to participate and be willing to come in. which was really exciting for me. I know sometimes it doesn't always work like that, but just the reception to this, and people got it. I mean, you know, we sent our blurb along and people were like, absolutely, this is something I want to be a part of, which was really exciting for the production team.
Yeah, the answer is, was it hard? The answer is no. It
No,
wasn't.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I started out, the first audio interviews that we did were ones that I did just with a tape recorder for the book. I didn't use, and some of them I even did on the phone, you know, interviewing people. And people, I even cold called Black funeral directors in Mississippi and Alabama, and they were willing to talk to me. So I would say it was not hard at all. I think African Americans are anxious to have their history documented. You know, wow, thank God somebody's finally documenting it. So it was not hard. And then when we started sending out the film team to film people, they were equally enthusiastic about participating. So I don't think it was hard at all. No.
So I'm sorry, I just want to jump in. So the second part of that question was, did the people that you interviewed, did they feel like we were regressing back to a period that they recognized?
I hear interviewing people that have been through segregation, that have lived through segregation, that were, that came out of the South, that faced, that were my parents' generation. Those people know that it's better now. It is better now. We have made some progress. So you cannot say that living in a country that had legalized segregation and living in a country that has finally eliminated legalized segregation, that it's not better. It is better. The problem is that, and I think Barack Obama said it best. He said that, history doesn't move in a straight line. Things improve and then there's a reaction. Things get better and then people react to those things getting better and they go back. And I think we're in one of those times when we've gone back. There's a reaction going on now to the presidency of Barack Obama. That's just what's happening. And so even though things have improved, we're in one of those times when we're going back to, we're pining away for the 1950s. White people in America are pining away for the way things were, or the way things they believe were in the 1950s, when Black people were virtually invisible. And that makes people feel more comfortable. Some people feel more comfortable, even though what they're thinking about is this time that never really existed. So.
Thank you. Kathleen, did you want to ask that second question?
Sure. We have another participant with their hand raised. So Valerie Anderson, I'm going to allow you to talk. I've also asked you to unmute if you would like to join us.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello?
Hello. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm really glad you talked about the parts that were funny. I mean, it wasn't really funny, but I'm old. I'm in my 70s. I probably have the unique experience of being born in New Jersey. Both parents were born in New Jersey, and grandparents were born in New Jersey, but we still had the same kind of car issues. I can remember when my father, there are 8 kids in the family, bought his first car and for $25, and he had a car payment note that was due. I think it took him about 5 years to pay for that car. But one of the great things we did was every Sunday, all the kids and my parents would pile into the car. The big kids held the little kids, and we would drive down to Bridgeton, New Jersey. And it was just last night that I figured out why my father was always taking those back roads, because he didn't want to get stopped with all of these kids in the car and him. The other thing that I liked was when you talked about some of the families from long ago Some of these children did not move further than a mile away from their homes in their entire lives. And I was in education. I'm a retired principal, but I was there for 42 years, and I can still remember kids even today who lived in the city, and if they went to another city, they thought they had gone to another country. So that much hasn't changed.
Valerie, where were you a principal?
In Plainfield and Perth Amboy and Union.
My mother was a principal in Newark as well.
The principal.
An elementary school. Oh, you would ask that.
Okay.
Louisa something or other. It was a woman's name.
Oh yeah, they had a lot of those in Newark.
Yeah.
I actually started out in Newark as a speech therapist.
Yes, Louisa Spencer.
Oh yes. Oh, that's one of the big schools in Newark.
She was vice principal there. She was also at Monmouth Street.
Okay. Well, I was only there for 2 years as a speech therapist. It was one of those programs that I wanted to get into, where I was the only Black person in the program, graduated, and realized that I hated dealing with all that spit. So I quickly became a classroom teacher.
Got it.
Thank you, Valerie.
All right, thank you.
We also have Kelly with her hand up, so I'm going to ask Kelly to unmute. We'll see how it goes.
I think Kelly's already unmuted.
Yeah, so we should be hearing from her soon. Kelly, did you have a question for our panelists? Okay, maybe that's not working so well. So Kelly, if you'd like, you can always drop your question into the Q&A or into the chat box. Okay, so we'll go back to the questions from the Q&A. We've got a question from Kilia. In comparing today to previous movements from the past, what do you perceive as different and what is the same?
What's the same is that it seems that you have to have a moment when white Americans, I guess because African Americans are only 13% of the American population, of the US population, you really have to have a moment when white Americans join with Black Americans and say, you know what, there really is racism in this country. That happened during, it happened during the Civil Rights Movement, when white Americans saw on television the violence that was perpetrated against Black Americans. It happened during the abolition movement. And so it seems to me that we might possibly have a moment. I can't tell you the number of people that have said to me, I didn't know, or I was unaware, or you know, they seem totally surprised at the systemic racism that they see in this country. I think we have worked really hard to tell happy stories. We don't like telling unpleasant stories about American history. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and everything is hunky-dory. And even the president recently said that it's unpatriotic to talk about diversity. It's unpatriotic to talk about the bad things that have happened, and to talk about slavery. The 1619 project, he condemned it. So, you know, his argument is that it's unpatriotic. My argument is that it is the story that needs to be told, because it's the only way that we've gotten better in this country. When the minority has stood up against the majority. That's the only time we've improved. You know, think of the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, the civil rights movement. Those are the times when legislation has been passed that have given people, that have expanded the franchise, that have made us better. When we just stick with the status quo, we don't get better, and we don't live up to the ideals that are stated in the Constitution.
And I think definitely just recent technology. I mean, being able to have cell phones to capture things and dash cams and body cams and really being able to have that footage when, you know, before maybe it was a movie camera, but if you weren't there, you couldn't capture it. And I think really social media and being able to know about things in real time, you know, with recent protests, people are able to get quick information about roads that are being closed and bridges being closed and kind of that predatory stuff that was happening, and people at least get a heads up, and it helps people organize in more efficient ways. But yeah, I mean, that was a big learning piece for me as well in the film when we're mentioning like the civil rights movement, and that was the time when it was nationally broadcast and the protests were out there for people to see, and what a difference that made. And I think that will only continue to happen as we have more technology as well.
Well, but the interesting thing about that psychologically is that, I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't even pretend to play one on television. But in 64, 65, that was a new thing for police and for racists and politicians to deal with, the advent of the movie camera, of news cameras. They were sort of caught unawares that when they were beating these protesters coming across the, you know, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, that all of a sudden all the Northerners were going to see that on their, you know, Channel 2, Channel 4 news broadcast, and then pass judgment on the Southerners, right? And so they were sort of caught unawares, you know. But after that, into the 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, the beating of Rodney King being captured by a home camcorder. At that point, all police departments knew that there was a possibility that they were going to be recorded. They're wearing body cams. They know that they're being recorded. They know that people are holding cell phones up and recording them. And they're still leaning into the camera, which sadly was blurred on the recent broadcast. But there's a cop that leans into a camera, tells the guy, "You're gonna get your bleep, you know, whooped in front of Lord, in front of that camera, Lord in all creation," and then leans into the camera right before he puts his hands around the guy's throat and yanks him out of the car and says, "Get ready for the show, folks." You know what I mean? So they know they're being recorded. That's not an issue. The issue is seeing us as human. That's the issue. Like if you see me as human, you can record the interaction all day. This is, "Hello, sir. How are you? Let me give you my license. Oh, yeah, I was speeding. I went 3 miles over the speed limit. Give me my ticket. Let me be on my way." The problem is if you don't see me as a human being and then I'm being recorded, but then you're still not worried about it, right? Because if I would, if my kid was recording me with a camera and there was a spider, you know, people like spiders, a water bug in my kitchen, and I stomped on it with my foot, I wouldn't think anything about it. Like, there's a bug in my kitchen, I got to step on it, I'm going to clean it up and throw it in the trash. That's the situation that we're facing. They're not worried about it being recorded.
There are no consequences. That's
There are
the
no
issue.
consequences.
There are no consequences. If you beat a black man, you shoot a black man, there are no consequences. That has been the problem.
Right. You know, when soldiers come home from war, there's, you know, programs for them to go into because they're dealing with all the, well, especially after Nam, people came home and they were so profoundly messed up because of the things that happened there and the sort of the psychological trauma that they underwent having to commit these atrocities in the name of American freedom, right? But they weren't ready for that, and a lot of them went into therapy. Every war since that, they're sort of prepared for that, and they send the people who come home from Afghanistan into therapy before they even sort of come back into the general populace. I don't think police officers have that or think that they need that because they're not traumatized by beating people up. They're not traumatized by pulling people out of a car, shooting somebody so that they can go home safely to their families. I really don't think that they're worried about it in that way. I could be wrong. I haven't talked to any cops that have killed people, so I'm sorry. I think we've gone off track.
And they won't talk to you. They won't talk.
I'm gonna go to the next question in the Q&A. Okay, Kathleen?
Absolutely.
So time was when driving while black meant that a black person was stopped on the New Jersey Turnpike just because of color and checked for drugs or charged with speeding when others were going at the same speed. How do you attribute the killing, or was it always this way?
I think that the first recorded incident of driving while black on the New Jersey Turnpike actually did involve an extrajudicial killing. I can't remember the two troopers. It was state troopers, and it was a minivan that they pulled over, and there were 5, both brown and Hispanic and black men in the car, and they shot over like 50 bullets into the car, and 4 of the 5 men were killed. I should have Emily. Do you happen to remember the particulars of that case? But that was the case that was the one that Christine Todd Whitman had to defend, and then had to wind up letting the state trooper, the head of the state troopers, he offered his resignation. And I think that was in '93. So I'm not sure if there's a line to be designated between when the killing started. I mean, killing's been happening for a long time.
Killing's been happening for a long time. I think what Emily said about the cell phone is clear. It's been happening. It just hasn't been recorded.
Right.
And so now that everybody's got a video camera in their pocket, they're recording it, and we're starting to see it. But it's been happening, and it was always the officer's word against the word of the other people in the car, or
right.
or just the officer's word if there was only one black person in the car. Now, we have pictures of it. It's always been happening. There's a question that was taken down, and I want to answer it because I think it's important. Doug asked, how did Rick Burns get involved?
I wanted to answer that too.
Okay. Absolutely.
And I think it's important. This project is something that I started more than 20 years ago. And that's why I think it's so well documented, because I did a huge amount of research. Then Steeplechase added to that research. We've been researching this topic collectively for 25 years. This is a lot of documentation. After 5 years ago, I was on a panel with Rick Burns at a conference, and I asked him to have lunch with me. You guys, I know Emir and Emily have heard this story a million times, but I'm going to say it again. I asked him to have lunch with me, and I brought my laptop, and I showed him the pictures, the photographs that I had gathered of this topic. And, when you're doing a film, you need a lot of pictures, as you could tell last night. And I had already gathered, a couple hundred pictures, as well as oral history interviews. And I wanted Rick to tell this story with me because I think he's a terrific storyteller. And I also think he is a copious researcher. The questioner had a critique about the Civil War film, which was primarily his brother's, but he worked with his brother on it. He's the baby brother. Everybody always puts in parentheses, Ken's brother. He's and he's kind of used to it by now. I don't like it when they say that, because I think he's a fantastic filmmaker in his own right. But he is a really great storyteller. And I thought, listen, I believe strongly, some people may disagree with me, but I believe strongly that we need not only allies in this fight, we need accomplices. Mm. And as you can see, we had a multiracial team working on this. So we had Black voices. My son, Greg, also worked on this project for its first 3 years. We had a multiracial team working on this, and I think that was so important. Black voices, but we also had white voices. And somebody asked, who was the audience? Well, yeah, the audience is Black people, and the audience is white people. The audience is Americans. And it's the reasonably, I guess, the conscious people that we wanted to quote Baldwin, to paraphrase Baldwin at the end. We wanted the conscious people, both black and white, involved in this project, because that's what it's going to take to change this culture. So go, Emir.
Yeah, I just thought that Doug fundamentally was confusing Rick and Ken Burns. He said there was a lot of controversy and criticism around the Civil War film series, and I was like, that's valid, but that's not Rick. I mean, yes, Rick was incredibly involved in the Civil War project, but you know, if you're going to say, if you're going to confuse the two, then you have to give them both benefits, right? You know, it's like, so one, this is not a Ken Burns film, this is a Rick Burns film. And two, if you have a problem with the Civil War film, that really is a Ken Burns film. And so it's just like, you have a problem with the Burns family, but just with the wrong dude. So, you know, if you have any problems with Ken Burns, you can reach him at Florentine Films, which is in New Hampshire. We will post his home phone number in the chat if you have any problems.
Okay, here come the lawsuits. Actually, Gretchen, what you said made me, I'm gonna, skip the line, folks, and ask my question about all the pictures. One of my questions about your process was, how did you select which pictures would make the cut, as it were, and which ones, you know, were like, oh, maybe that's too graphic, or maybe that doesn't tell the story we want to.
You know, I think we all had a say in which pictures were used and which pictures, you know, there were so many pictures of African Americans took pictures of themselves with their cars. They loved to take pictures with their cars. So we had a plethora, as you could see, of pictures of people with their automobiles. And I think, I know Emily is great at this, going out and doing research. My son was good at it, and finding that picture that tells that story. But I'll also tell you that some of the pictures came over the transom. You know, a few times, like there's a great picture that we just acquired recently that a man from Michigan, you know, he just said, you know, I have this picture, and he sent it, and it was a picture of a family in the back of their car with the trunk open and all the stuff in the trunk. I mean, you couldn't have a more perfect picture. But those pictures, you know, you pick the pictures that really are strong, that really make the point really, really, really strongly, and that are well-framed, good quality pictures, as if you were picking for an exhibition. You know, a film is as visual. And I know that Emir as well picked some of the more upsetting pictures. There were so many pictures left out too. I mean,
oh yeah,
hundreds. We had hundreds and hundreds of images.
Yeah, and I think we started to see too, there was a lot, especially at the end, a lot of pictures that mirrored each other, like, you know, some from the 30s and 40s that looked very similar to things from the 70s and 80s. And so it was an amazing project to work on, because there was so much archival and so many wonderful finds. I mean, we looked in lots of different sources. I mean, big sources like Library of Congress and things like that, but a lot of local public libraries had amazing collections.
Little historical societies,
yes.
And of course, family snapshots.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of these pictures came out of people's albums.
Yes, and actually we just got an email, I think today or yesterday, that someone recognized their family members in some of the footage, and they had reached out and said, oh, can you tell us where you found that? We've never seen that before. Can you put us in contact? And it's so exciting. And I know we're hoping
who's died.
Yes, someone that has passed away. Yeah, and I know we were a little bit involved with NMAC, or the Museum, the Smithsonian, that they did a home movie project about digitizing people's home movies, and it was a public event about having the community members come in and get their films digitized and putting it in the Smithsonian's collection. And there's more and more of that happening. That's what the Southside Home Movie Project does. And we're hoping to somehow kind of connect with that, because that's really, you know, what made this film come to life. And it's so important to preserve all this old film, you know, before it goes bad. And yeah, so it was just incredible project to work on. And so much, like you said, Gretchen, there's so much. We're hoping somehow to get more, maybe on our website or something, to show even more of the things we found.
Right.
Maybe a sequel.
The thing is that we have questions. I mean, we have questions. You know, life is hard, you know, right? So we all have other things to do with our life. So that box in the attic, that box in the garage, that, you know, those photos under the bed, you know, who's got time to take this little teeny tiny, you know, film reel, actually that was just tape, but, you know, like a little teeny tiny film reel, and figure out how to get it transferred. You know, if you take it to your local store, they're like, we can't do anything with that. Like, it's all digital, you know, now. So then now you got to send it to some obscure film lab in Texas, who's then going to charge you $150. You don't even know what's on it. So it just withers in the attic, in the basement, you know, in a box, in the closet somewhere. When in actuality, it is a time machine to a different place, to a different time and a different place in our history. And it's so important. So I'm glad that organizations like the Blacksonian are reaching out to people and saying that your history has value. You know, we need you. We're not going to charge you for it. At least I don't think they're charging. But if you just bring it to us, we'll transfer it. We'll take care of it. We will credit you for it, and we will put it in the National Registry of Blackness, so to speak, or the American Registry, right? Just totally real quick story, slightly off topic. My friend Stanley Nelson and his main editor, my mentor Louis Erskine, were doing a film on Jonestown. And so they had reached out to several of the families that had been involved in Jonestown. And Jim Jones, for whatever it is, there was one moment in that film that absolutely made me understand him, right? Because Jim Jones and Jonestown came to prominence after Kennedy had been assassinated, after Malcolm and Martin had been assassinated. So I believe in that mid-60s period, we as a community, as a society, were very prone to this Messiah complex, right? We were looking for these charismatic leaders. And Jones was that. He was a charismatic leader. They had some footage of him preaching in church where he's holding up the Bible. And he says, this black book, dramatic pause, this black book has been holding down black people for years. And he takes the Bible and he throws it down the center of the aisle. And in that moment, watching that film, I was like, I get it. This guy is super charismatic. He just threw the Bible at us and told us it was holding down black people. Where do I sign up? Like, nobody knew it was going to end with the Kool-Aid at the end, but it was just like a very, very dramatic thing. So they were looking for those moments. And actually, I'm sorry, I take it back. That moment on film came from him reaching out to a guy who was 10 years old, you know, in Jonestown, in Guyana, and survived. And he said, he kept telling Stanley, like, I think there's a box of stuff in the attic. I'll go look at it. And then he didn't go. And then 3 months later, it's like, oh, and, you know, Stanley's like, can I send somebody? He's like, no. I actually went, and there were no pictures. The pictures were in there, but they got water damage on them, so I don't think they're going to be any good to you. And the only thing in there was these little teeny tiny film reels. He was like, send those to me. And he sent them to him. He transferred them, and that moment was on those little teeny tiny film reels that had no value to him, but had tremendous value, you know, to the film. So please, all of you, you know, listening to this, you know, go dig those boxes out of your attic and then send them to Emily. I don't want anything to do with them, but Emily will take care of, you know, transferring all of them.
And some of these, Gretchen, were your own home movies, which
oh yeah,
is amazing. And those we digitized early on and found, and you didn't know what was on those film reels, did you? No. And that the little girl in the car is Gretchen, and
the incredibly adorable little girl in the car trying to stick the key
precious
in the thing and getting so incredibly frustrated. That is Dr. Gretchen Sorin.
But what I really liked about that was the interior of the Studebaker. You get a really good
red
view
and gray leather
of that interior of that Studebaker.
Right, it's amazing. I know it might be a little late now, but I feel like your father should have got a cinematography credit.
I know.
Because between that and some of the other footage,
Yeah.
Buddy Squires is out here taking credit for things that he didn't actually do.
Oh, that's right. We'll have to get on him about that.
Oh, wow. And I'm gonna allow Kelly another opportunity to ask her question. She was having some difficulty earlier, so. Kelly, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay!
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Woo! Okay. It's like technology fail. I wanted to say thank you so much for just making this documentary and putting it out there, and putting it out there on NPR / Maryland Public Television, whatever, because everyone could get to see it. I invited all my friends on Facebook to watch it as well. I said, this is my life, the history. So I'm semi-old, I'm 52. And I
That's not
found,
old, Kelly.
it's just semi-old, it wasn't the 70s,
No, it's
not 20 something. So
I mean, I'm 52, so I refuse to see that as semi-old.
Okay, I'll take that, thank you. So my comment and then my question are as follows. My comment is, I have sort of a background that did involve the travel from the north to the south, going to Big Mama's house in Smithfield, Virginia, but just from Baltimore area. But also my father was in the Air Force for 26 years. So I've moved all over. And one of our moves was from the Langley area. So we lived in the real Virginia, not Northern Virginia. And driving around there in the 70s, we were driving while black. And I remember my mom's sister coming down, and she was Muslim at the time, and they were wearing, that version of the hijab, the scarf on the head and everything else, and them getting pulled over, but only being saved because my dad was driving around in his uniform, his Air Force uniform. So it was sort of like the cop had to make a decision, what do we do about that? So one of my questions, and just I'll try to segue quickly. One of my questions is, did you have any footage or any commentary from military members driving around while black in uniform or not? Additionally, police officers who might have been black but out of uniform, who may or may not have had issues. I just wonder if any of that came up in your conversations. And the last thing I'll leave with is my biggest memory of driving while black and existing across America was driving from from Virginia to Idaho in an Econoline camper van in the 1980. And just my mother saying, we can stop here, we can't stop here. She had her own green book in her head. And I remember the coffee can in the back where if you had to use the bathroom.
Yep.
Because it was two girls, so it wasn't boys where you can go against a tree. We have the coffee can. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for just illuminating the issue, bringing it back into public view. So it's not just history. Thank you.
My grandmother always wanted to carry that can in the car, and I never understood why, because I thought it's disgusting. Why would we carry that can? But that my grandmother, lived with that. About the military uniforms, some African Americans were, when they came back from World War II, were actually beaten because they were wearing military uniforms. It didn't save them, especially in the South. There were people that believed they didn't deserve to wear, even after they had been fighting in Germany or in Europe, they didn't deserve to wear the uniform, and so they beat them and or murdered them when they were not just driving, but on buses. They would be stopped, and there was an instance of a black soldier and a white soldier in uniform on a bus, and the driver, they were friends, and the driver of the bus told them, no, you can't sit together. And they said, no, we're soldiers, we're US soldiers. We've been to Europe, we can sit together, we're friends. They said, no, we're friends. And the driver said, no, you can't sit together. And they continued to sit together. The driver pulled out a gun and started shooting. So there were instances where the uniform did not help. In fact, it hurt. So your father was very lucky that his uniform was respected, I think.
That, and I guess 20 years later.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And this is a little different, but when we interviewed Candace Taylor, who has a book out called The Overground Railroad, she tells the story about how her stepfather talked about having a chauffeur's hat in the car at all times. So if he was pulled over and questioned for having a nice car or driving around, he would always say, "Oh no, this is my chauffeur's hat. This is not my car. I'm driving for my employer right now." And that was a story she had really never heard about. And then when she started doing research for her book, that kind of came out of the woodwork. So I guess in that way, different type of uniform, I guess, but that was something. And she said she's spoken to people that also have heard similar stories from their family members that would do that. So.
Wow. So the slave hat, so the chauffeur's hat was like his slave pass. That's really deep.
Yeah.
And extremely troubling. Yeah.
Kelly,
Go ahead.
I just want to address Kelly in the real Virginia. I went to Hampton University in the Tidewater area, so I definitely understand the real Virginia versus the fake Northern Virginias. So.
Thank you.
North Virginia, it was still Virginia, believe me.
Right.
It was muted because I did live there briefly for a few months where everything blew up. But the neighborhood I walked around in, I introduced myself to every neighbor purposefully so that if they saw me walking around later, they're not calling anybody.
Right. Steep.
Okay. So there was another question from True Lewis. This talk made me realize how I travel today from what my parents taught me in the 70s. We would drive from Pennsylvania to Southeast Alabama, quote unquote, down home a few times a year. We still have the Maxwell coffee can in the trunk for just in case. So that's obviously a very relatable story to members of our audience.
But for children who get their coffee today from little tiny paper cups from Starbucks, they have no concept of the Maxwell coffee can and just how big that can was. I mean, this was a sizable thing. I don't even drink coffee, but there was always a Maxwell coffee can, in my house. I don't think there was ever coffee in the can, but it was just like sort of a container that we put stuff in. Like one had change in it, the other had lard in it. So, shout out to the Maxwell coffee can, because that was a staple of Black life,
There were 1 pound cans and there were 2 pound cans.
Oh,
yeah.
I only knew the 2 pound cans. They're really the big ones.
Yeah.
Depends on how long your trip was.
Right.
How big the family, right? Yeah.
Right.
Well, the 2 pound can was the pea can. That was the can that you carried to pee in.
Exactly.
Okay. Another question, this one from Alita Crawley. At our last session, Dr. Soren talked about the role of AAA, one of the largest lobbying groups in the US. It was surprising and uplifting to learn about the role that Esso and Gibraltar Publishing played in this topic. Did all of the other oil and car companies ignore this emerging market?
Not completely. Humble Oil was also involved. Humble Oil doesn't really exist anymore, but they were pushing hard to get the African American market. And General Motors was also hiring African Americans. The other car companies were not, but GM was. So I think there were other people that kind of on the fringe that saw an African American market, and very gradually other companies. So Seagram's and, they're not automobile companies, but they're all major manufacturing companies started to hire Black executives, and they start to push for the hiring of more Black people in their organization. So Pepsi-Cola, which is a New York company, Seagram's, which is alcohol, maybe that's not the best. Pushing alcohol to African Americans, perhaps it's not the best product, but there were companies that were starting to get the idea. And the idea comes from the Black newspapers that do these marketing studies. And the marketing studies were to say, okay, well, Black people are using, white lily flour or gold medal flour, and they're using Esso gasoline, and they're using this kind of oil, and they're using, they were really looking at the various products that Black people were using, and they were using that to say to these companies, if you want Black people to continue buying your product, you need to start hiring Black people. So it was the power of the pocketbook to convince these companies to do some hiring.
And I will say, interviewing Howard was so fun, and I can't remember how we stumbled across his information, but for him to talk about his father and Gibraltar printing, that was a fun moment for us, and the dream books in Harlem, and yeah, that was a great addition.
Wonderful. The next comment and question is from Renee M. I have a comment, not a question. I feel the mass and global protests that were ignited with the viral video of George Floyd's murder was enabled by the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. I think this is primarily because there have been many videos of abusive police brutality. Rodney King's was mentioned. With the pandemic shutdown, diverse people saw the atrocity globally and now had, quote, uninterrupted time, unquote, to protest. So no work, no school. What does the panel think about the factor of the shutdown?
I think that's so spot on. I think, there were no sports, there was less entertainment, less live entertainment, people were working from home. So I think it really changed what people were consuming and kind of maybe had to look a little more closely at things. Yeah, I would hope that people are thinking more deeply about it, but I mean, as Emir said, we hope for that, and we hope that anything we can do and put this out in the world helps people kind of think a little deeper and empathize more. But yeah, it's certainly been an interesting, many months now, and how it's changed things.
Well, I think it laser focused people's attention on George Floyd, and not just African American people and people of color, but white people as well. And I do think that somebody posted something about young people, and did young people feel that this was too disturbing? And I think young people were looking for something to care about. It's not like my generation, that went out and protested against the Vietnam War. There hasn't been that kind of seminal event that has galvanized young people. But the murder of George Floyd seems to be one of those things, and not only because of the COVID-19, but because of that loss of mobility. You cannot compare, I'm not comparing the loss of mobility that African Americans have experienced to the loss of mobility that we've all experienced because of COVID, but it's been a little taste of it. It's been a little taste of what it means to not be able to go and move about freely. And I think that's made a real difference for people, and especially young people.
It also, just in a purely visual sense, it was that cop smirk, right? I mean, there have been, if we look at it as sort of a chain of dominoes, Mike Brown leads to Philando, leads to, there's a series of things happening, and each one is pushing people's empathy or anger closer and closer and closer. So I don't want to give the last domino any more poignancy than the previous dominoes that fell before it, because you need all of them. If George Floyd had happened here in the chain instead of here, then it would have been, and obviously the protests / quote unquote riots in Ferguson were just as, they weren't worldwide, but there were just as many people out of there, and Black Lives Matter really grew out of that. So you needed that to get to this, to then get to George Floyd. But it really was, and I can't, remember Derek Chauvin, the cop kneeling on George. It was his absolute disregard for human life. The the hands in the pocket, the looking directly at the camera with this feeling like, yeah, this is what I do on a Saturday. I think that was, if you're on the fence about Mike Brown, did he have his hands up? Was he reaching for the gun? All of that. There was no video for that. There was no video for Trayvon Martin. Maybe, maybe he shouldn't have been selling loose cigarettes on the corner in Staten Island. Maybe this. There were just no excuses with Floyd. And looking at that guy's face, who is allegedly a police officer, allegedly performing his duty with this incredible look of ennui, almost like, it's just like somebody. It was almost like he was looking at the camera and saying, I wish this guy would die already so that I could get up because my knees are hurting.
Well, and he begs for his life. He begs for his life, and he begs for his mother.
Right.
I mean, it was
right.
It was ridiculous that the guy said, "I can't breathe," and he continued to suffocate him.
Right. Just because.
Yeah, and I think another element that's been interesting too is, I mean, Ferguson was big, but it also, this moment feels like it's more international, which is different. And I think because the whole entire world was shut down in a way that it hasn't been before, I think it's more widespread in other countries, even though it's such a deeply American issue. Obviously, people can relate all around the world and are really paying attention to that.
Right.
And I don't know if people didn't slow down in the way they did, if people would care as much or would notice.
But it continued. It continued. That's the thing that was so shocking. Mm-hmm. Even after George Floyd was murdered, it continued.
Yeah.
We have them, Ahmaud Arbery, and it's like, what are they thinking? They've learned nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I remember, and I think you already mentioned this, Emir, that the last time you were here, that you were going to leave time at the end, right, for the next thing to happen, right? And the next thing that happened did happen, and then the next thing happened, and yet another domino, and so on and so forth. And you're right; it is the indifference with which so-called police seem to address the camera, right? They look directly in the camera and they say, "So what?"
And
next,
because they can, if they say, "I feared for my life," that's all they have to do is say, "I feared for my life," and then they get off.
Right.
If the person is unarmed, even if the person, the person is completely unarmed, and they're the ones with the guns and the sticks. But all you have to do is say, "I feared for my life."
Right. And you have footage in the film of people complying and still getting attacked and beaten. So it's there is no it doesn't seem to matter whether you do the so-called right thing or you obey or you give proper deference if that person with a uniform and with an attitude and a gun or a stick,
which is why Craig Wilder says that it's a myth that parents can protect their children.
Yeah,
it's a myth that you think that you can give your child the tools to comply adequately and be safe, because you can't. That's the myth.
Yeah.
Or that there are methods of walking or talking or behaving that will protect you.
Right.
So it is very disconcerting. I'd be interested if any of I'm sorry, not the panelists, but the people who are listening have family members or perhaps law enforcement themselves, because I don't want to paint all cops, with one brush. But on the other hand, when I hear this equivalency that it's just a few bad apples, I tend to personally lean more towards, no, at this point it's a rotten orchard, it really needs to be sort of burned down to the ground because the fruit coming out of it is just bad.
Fruit of the poison tree.
So let's start over. let's replant some trees and start over. But, you know, if you have an uncle, cousin, you know, mother, sister, you know, who's law enforcement, you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear from you.
I actually do have family members who are law enforcement, and I was raised with them and raised in a law and order sort of mentality. So it was a little difficult to, I can remember like feeling like, wait,
So multiple members of your family?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you know what?
Dad,
Law and
brother?
order, we all agree with that our society needs to be based on laws. But those laws need to apply to police as well as to everyone else.
Equally, yeah.
Great.
You know, the law and the order need to apply to the police. The police are not immune from the law of the land. And they are breaking the law when they profile, when they racially profile, and when they drag people out of their cars. That is against the law. You know, they're breaking the law. So, you know, this whole, you know, dichotomy there, it's either law and order or we have complete chaos because Black people are saying that they don't want to be dragged out of their cars. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The law has to apply to everyone. You know, one of the things that, first of all, there are two things I need to say about this. One is that President Obama convened a task force on policing. That I mentioned this the last time I was here, and that is online. You can read it, and it has recommendations, and it has good recommendations. The second thing is, when I interviewed the Montreal police chief, he views law enforcement as problem solving, different from law enforcement. So police have two jobs. Law enforcement is one job. Problem solving is the other job. So if problem solving means if you go into a situation, you're looking for a solution to that problem that causes the least amount of damage to the community and to the individuals involved, whether that's a domestic disturbance or somebody who's mentally ill, or a child, or somebody who is during a traffic stop. If you do your best to diffuse the situation, not to increase it. And what we saw last night in the film was, in every instance, those police officers were escalating rather than diffusing.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed. Joy, do you know if any of your law enforcement family members have seen the film, or?
I don't know, but I'll make sure they do.
Yeah, yeah. Or, you know, we could just call them right now. Because I got questions. I got so many questions.
Emir wants to ask him some questions.
Okay.
Right.
So, well, that is interesting. Did you consider interviewing any police officers for the film?
We may have considered it, but COVID changed our
okay.
sort of shooting
Okay.
for the. It's weird to use that word shooting in that context, but COVID changed our production plans.
I'll tell you what, I tried multiple times with multiple police officers, and they would not talk to me. They would not. And that's why I ended up interviewing the head of the task force, Obama's task force, and I had ended up interviewing the police chief in Montreal.
Oh, for the book.
Yes, for the book.
Oh, okay. Wow. Because I feel like, you know, there's a safety in giving somebody a quote for a book that maybe, you know, isn't there for being in a film. But that's interesting that they wouldn't talk to you even for a book.
It's interesting too, because I did my research, and I researched police chiefs around the country who had done good work, and I wanted to interview them about the good work they had done. And I had a bunch of them say, oh yes, they would talk to me, but I could never set up an appointment. Those appointments just never came. I called back and I called back and I called back. They never came.
Right.
Wow, that's deep.
They don't want to be on record.
Yeah.
And they don't want to break that blue wall.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want to go against their brothers. And that's the biggest problem, that they won't stand up and say, there are some police officers that shouldn't be police officers.
Right.
I remember not too long ago there was a Black woman officer who did. She actually released a video, and it did cause her a great deal of problems. But yeah, she did come out and say, you know, that if you are afraid of Black people, then you should not be wearing this uniform. And she blatantly said it, and I give her a lot of credit for coming out there. But I'm monopolizing, so I'm going to ask. I know that Susie DeBryan had a question, and I'm going to allow Susie. Susie, okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Gretchen. It's Sue DeBryan.
Hi, Sue. How are you?
Good. I wanted to comment that a few months before reading Driving While Black, I read a book called The Vagabonds about Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. And it was touted as being the book that discussed the advent of automobiles and how it changed America. And I thoroughly enjoyed the book. And then I read Driving While Black, and I realized that there was a second piece to this story that was completely untold. And it reminded me of our education in the 60s and the 70s, where we were taught one side of history only. And I think that Driving While Black should be the companion book to The Vagabonds, so that people can see both sides of that history.
Well, thank you, and I love that idea. I think, and Emily can talk a little bit about this, but the next step is to start to develop some curriculum materials.
It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and we're hoping to provide an opportunity to bring in our interviewees for events as well. So hopefully they can share even more. I know Kathleen Franz and Kenneth Jackson were great about Henry Ford and the advent of the automobile. And you know, we knew eventually we had to tell that piece of the story. I know there were conversations in the editing room about how long it took us to actually talk about the car, because you know, there's so much that happens before that, and we wanted to make sure we're setting the context and hitting the right points in the timeline. But we knew, you know, that at that moment, and also the Model T footage, I still am in awe of how crisp and clear and amazing of the assembly lines and the workers and everything. So there's a lot to work with there, but yeah, we're really excited about outreach. Obviously, it's changed a lot from what we wanted it to be, and hope to excited. And I think Zoom and, you know, the digital aspect of all of this is going to make it even more accessible for people, hopefully. So, you know, people can tune in from all over. So stay tuned.
So I want to pitch my tent for, you know, you can use us as a testing ground if anybody wants to just sort of, you know, who doesn't necessarily want to have that whole Oprah experience quite yet. I'm happy to be a low budget surrogate.
And I think it needs to be in high schools. I think it really needs to be that at that level before it addresses adults. I think you know, the documentary does a great job of reaching adult audiences, but I think it needs to be lower. One thing that the Cooperstown, you know, I live in Cooperstown, New York. One thing the Cooperstown School is doing is, and I know this is also happening in Connecticut, they're looking at the entire curriculum and how they can start to put African-American history into each grade level. So doing something, instead of saying, okay, in February, we're going to study Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, done. They're starting to look at what can they do in kindergarten, what can they do in first grade, how can they integrate, and I'm not talking about Driving While Black, I'm just talking about African-American history, how they can integrate it into each grade level. And Cooperstown is doing the same thing. They put Driving While Black into the junior curriculum. It's the reading this year, not for history, but for creative writing. It's going to be the reading. And then we're looking at helping them figure out what they can do in kindergarten, what they can do in first grade, what they can do in second grade, what they can do in third grade. So hopefully, you know, they'll have an expanded curriculum.
Yeah, hopefully without interference. That will be
New Jersey
considered.
will do that too.
Yeah.
New Jersey is one of the most diverse states in the country, and its curriculum could really use some work.
Okay.
Having gone through the New Jersey school system and knowing, you know, what the New Jersey school system curriculum is.
Okay. And I'm going to defer to your greater knowledge on that. I so appreciate how much time you've already given to us. We have one or two more questions, but I'm gonna just indicate that we may not get to everyone before we have to let everyone go for the evening. I feel like we could talk for so much more. There's so much to cover, and that was actually one of the questions that my director asked. There's so much to cover. How did you make choices to on what to cover and what not to cover in the film? What to include in the film? Particularly, she wanted to know about whether you considered the current protests, whether adding those to the film. The current.
Yeah, I get it. You know, for me personally, what do those protests have to do with mobility? Right? You know, so for me, that was sort of like, would be clawing in sort of, it just seemed like a cheap trick, you know, and you know, I'm not trying to downplay, you know, your director's idea, but to end this film, so we ended the film with Jacob Lick and with his sister, so that is very contemporary. But if we had showed, you know, people walking across the Brooklyn Bridge saying, you know, I can't breathe, or no justice, no peace, it's like, I'm not really sure what the connection is with all the other things that we had seen. It would just be us taking advantage of a moment, you know, and I wasn't really here. And I'm not saying I was in some of those protests, you know, so it's just like, I don't have anything against the protests, but I think we're going to see a lot of films where the film is about goat herders in the Taklamakan desert, and then the last 25 seconds or last minute of the film is like, and then there were protests in Paris, and I'm just like, no, wrong discussion, wrong time. So yeah, I don't think it really came up.
I think as well, exactly what Emir said, I think our through line was mobility. And at one point it wasn't race, space, and mobility in America. It was African Americans on the road in the Jim Crow era. So we kind of at some point.
That's the same story.
It's the same, right. Yeah. But I think we kind of broadened it a little and then really made an effort to make our through line mobility. And as Gretchen says in the film, I think a lot of moments are that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And we really wanted to show how Reconstruction happened and then it was rolled back. Emancipation happened, and like that was just over and over again. We see that throughout history with highway development and, you know, urban renewal and all of these things where there were brilliant Black entrepreneurs creating wonderful spaces, and then we're up against so much in these institutional systems that were really harmful. And I think it was such a balance because, again, like we said before, you know, we didn't want to dwell on all of the negativity and didn't want the entire film to be kind of a downer, and wanted to celebrate those moments. But I think for us, it was how can everything be about mobility and also kind of timeless? I think that really happened. Like the quote at the end with James Baldwin, I mean, that was from the 60s and rung very, very true today. And a lot of that material really spoke to everything in the past as well as everything that's happening, which is absolutely unfortunate, but really, really helped pull the story together, I think.
And it's about the car. It's really about the automobile. And if you think about it, it's not, Trayvon Martin is not in it because Trayvon Martin was not in a car.
Right.
You know, some of the other, Brown is not in it because he wasn't in a car. It's not generally about African Americans being murdered. It's about the relationship of the automobile and African Americans, and that is the relationship between the police. You know, that is how that comes in. And all of those people that you see at the end in that last 10 or 15 minutes were stopped, you know, it was as a result of a traffic stop. And that was one of the dangers on the road. There were multiple dangers on the road, right? But that was one of the dangers, and that's not the only thing that the film is about. You know, it's really about travel. And a really important part of the film was about the development of this incredible network of African-American businesses, you know, and that grew up across the country to serve Black travelers, you know, and that, you know, Emily kept saying through line, I call it the big idea. You know, when you have an exhibition or you have a film, you have a big idea and you've got to stick to that big idea. Otherwise it's about everything. You know, a historian can connect everything, right? You can go off on all kinds of tangents. And to put in the current protests, I think would be a tangent that would get off track.
Mm.
Okay, thank you for that. So I was just trying to make sure that I got some of the questions, people who didn't get an opportunity to ask a question. There's several folks who actually asked more than one question. So I wanted to give you the floor to see if there was a question that you saw that you wanted to answer, or a comment that you saw that you wanted to address in the Q&A or in the chat. Go ahead.
The very last question from Sabrina Jones.
Okay.
She says, I feel like some people get into policing to be able to harm others, power and the law backing them up. I don't know if people get into policing specifically to harm people, because the first thing cops seem to complain about when they have to, you know, use force is like, oh my God, now I got to do a bunch of paperwork. Oh my God, now I'm going to be put on desk duty for a little while. So I agree when I hear cops say, it's not like cops are going out looking to beat people up or looking to shoot people, because that would be premeditated, right? And so, but I do think that law enforcement attracts people with control issues. I do think that, I'll figure out how to say this without incriminating myself. Men have control issues, you know, so I do think that law enforcement attracts a particular type of man. Like, you know, all the guys I went to high school with, not all, but a large majority of them were from the Rockaways, you know, in Queens. It's very much a cop and fireman, you know, kind of place. Their dads were cops or firemen, and so they sought to emulate what their fathers and uncles and whatnot were. And when I figured that out sometime in college, that guys that I played football with were now going to have guns, it was frightening to me, because I was like, I know this guy. I know what he's about at his core. That is frightening to me. Like if he pulled me over, the only thing that would get me out of trouble is the fact that we play ball together. The only thing, you know. So Sabrina, I don't know if people are going in specifically to harm others, but I think that, because it seems like the thing that escalates all of those, and I was talking with Emily about this, like you do a project like this, you're researching things on YouTube, and the way that the algorithms for all these programs work is that if you search for 1950s cars, they show you 1950s cars, or, oh, have you checked out these cars from the 70s? So our searching was constantly for, you know, police traffic stops. And so my entire YouTube suggestions are for, you know, I don't know what I'm going to have to do to counter program my YouTube. I'm gonna have to start searching for bunnies and pictures of unicorns and stuff like that, because I get a steady stream of man assaulted in, Canada, man assaulted in here, this, that, and the other thing. So, I've seen an extraordinary amount of them, and it seems like it's a traffic stop, and then they tell you to do something, and if you don't do it fast enough, or if you ask a question, it's like, I told you to do something. Which, as a father, I understand that voice. Like, I'm not interested in your excuses about the dishes. I told you to do the dishes. But I'm not expecting for a grown man, a police officer, to treat me like a child and say, I told you to do something. It's like, I don't care what you told me to do. This is what I'm going to do. And then you're face down on the pavement. So it seems to be a control issue. It would be really interesting to see if we put a 5 to 10 year moratorium on hiring men as officers and only hired women, how policing in America would substantively change. Because I think a lot of it might be a gender issue. A need to control and dominate your space. I don't know.
Thank you for that. Gretchen or Emily, do you want to address that, or another comment or question?
I think Emir did a great job. I was trying to, I'm not sure how to address Carla's question. I've read it 3 times and I'm not exactly sure what she's asking. She's asking about the shock of police beatings and the comparing that with the postcards and souvenirs of lynchings. Was it different because Northerners were seeing the beatings for the first time? I think in Northerners perfectly happy to engage in the beating, so I'm not sure that it was a north-south thing. One of the things that I can't. Somebody asked a question about New Jersey, and I didn't have a chance to answer that question. So the thing I would say is that someone asked me. A hairdresser told me that was in the film. Her name's Vernell Allen. She told me that New Jersey was a Klan state, and since I'm from New Jersey, I said, "Oh, it certainly was not a Klan state." And she said, "No, New Jersey's a Klan state." And I did the research and found out, yeah, the Klan was really big in New Jersey in the 1920s and 30s. And there were cross burnings and rallies and big nighttime Klan events in New Jersey. And I was kind of shocked and horrified. And then I found out that the Klan was huge in Binghamton, New York. And that was one of the headquarters of the Klan, where they were primary anti-Catholic, but they were kind of multiple haters, and they hated Black people and Jews as well as Catholics. And the Klan was big in Connecticut too.
They're very diverse in that way.
Yes, I know.
They're very open and diverse in that way.
It's good of them.
Equal opportunity right. Hate. And so I think sometimes we try to set up this North-South dichotomy that the North is good and the South is bad. And we find that, there was segregation in the North. There were even segregation signs in Harlem, if you can imagine that, in Harlem. So, that said that white tenants only in some of the apartment buildings. So,
the Cotton Club was segregated.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, people were allowed to perform, but they weren't allowed to come and sit down and eat and watch the show. But you could be on stage performing for people, So yeah, you're right.
And
very shocking.
Denver, Colorado, and all over Colorado, that surprised me. That was something. And Tamara Banks, who's a journalist, she's working on a project about. They're trying to rename Stapleton Airport because he is affiliated with was affiliated with the KKK. And again, kind of goes back to that, there are still things named after prominent KKK members, and there are, indicators of that in society that you don't think about, and you might not know that because it's kind of a little subversive. But once you do know that, we need to do something about it.
They were presidents.
Or how about just
members of the
right.
Klan. I mean, it was considered a men's club, and they were, yeah. So, but I don't think we could say that all the lynchings that took place, most of them were in the South, but there were lynchings in the North as well as beatings and burnings and murders. And the Klan was strong. So how does the shock of police beatings compare with the previous postcards and souvenirs from the lynchings? Was it different because Northerners were seeing the beatings for the first time? You know, I would have to say that I think Northerners were complicit in slavery. Northerners were involved with the Klan. It didn't matter necessarily what part of the country. Perhaps it was worse. It was worse in the South, where there were legalized segregation, you know, where it was by law, segregation by law, but there were certainly pockets and remain pockets. There are certainly still places in the North where you shouldn't go if you're African American. You know, and you think about, I'm trying to remember the Black man who ran through a neighborhood in Queens and was murdered. I can't think of his name. What was it?
No, I'm saying he was running, or he was running from people.
No, he was in it. This is quite a few years ago. He was in a neighborhood in Queens. It was a white neighborhood, and a crowd chased him down, and I think he was hit by a car.
Yeah. That is, sorry.
It was on the Belt Parkway. Yeah, I can't think of his name.
Michael Griffith.
Michael
I'm
Griffith.
almost positive. I mean, there were several, but
that was also, you could argue that was about mobility. It was about restriction of Black people being in in a white neighborhood. You know, where they were.
Michael Griffith was chased onto the parkway in Howard Beach.
Yes, that's it. That's exactly it.
Yep. Yeah. I remember that. It's sad. It's almost like it's a rite of passage for I don't want to limit it just to gender, but you know, for my daughters who are close, younger, but my older daughter is 5 years younger than Breonna Taylor, and I'm sure Breonna is going to be her flashpoint for enough is enough, you know, in this, because she can see herself in that young girl, young woman. You know, she could see 5 years into the future and say, you mean I could be asleep in my bed, a no-knock warrant could be executed, and somebody could just come in and shoot me? You know, like, how? You know, how does that happen in this place that I call home? And so, you know, Michael Griffith in some ways was my Emmett Till, because I grew up in Brooklyn, not too far away from Howard Beach. So I knew that pizzeria stand that he was at. I knew we're here, you know, he got chased out and you know, into the middle of the street. So, and sadly, I think my, you know, grandchildren, whenever they get here, they will have their own, you know, version, you know, of that the person that they point to and then say, person X, you know, oh, that was what radicalized me, or that was what let me know that I too, this could happen to me too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, on that happy note.
Yeah, I was gonna say. We unfortunately are way out of time, and I thank you all for indulging us and speaking well past the agreed upon time, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. I do want to take a moment to properly thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get to give your introductions your full due, because your roster of achievements and accomplishments is something that people should know. But I want to make sure to plug Gretchen's book, Driving While Black, because without which we would not be here. Should I hold it up?
Pull it back just a little bit.
Pull it
just
back
so that
a
they
little.
can see the full.
So they get the full effect.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly. So
thank you so much. And truly, I mentioned to Gretchen in the before everyone logged in, it was truly an aesthetically beautiful film. I think cinematography, cinema, that word, whatever that means, that it was just so beautiful. The lighting was so beautiful on the faces. I wish someone had properly lit me, but oh well. And
That's
yeah.
Eddie Squires. He's an amazing cinematographer.
Okay, thank you.
as well as your dad. Let's give.
That's right. My father
right.
did the little girl and the Studebaker.
Right.
Right.
Oh yes, and just as I said, just the selections of the photos and the way that the narrative, the big idea, the way that it all went through from beginning to end, the parallels from the Underground Railroad to the stops on in the Green Book, just so much to comment on, and obviously not enough time. But thank you. Thank you for producing this. Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for sharing it with the public. I want to give a special thanks to everyone at Steeplechase Films. Rick Burns, we are sorry that you couldn't join us, but we appreciate you. And also to Bonnie Lefebvre. Am I saying her name right? I apologize if I mangle it. Bonnie Lefebvre?
Lefebvre,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you to her. And also to PBS for airing that. One of the questions actually that we didn't get to was it difficult to get funding for this program? And
it was a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. Okay.
However,
what is this funding you speak of? You mean they give people money to make films?
Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work and a lot of but I have to say the Mellon Foundation was amazingly supportive. The Ford Foundation, Rick and I actually made visits to these places and met with people, and they loved the topic. They really thought it was important to do, and they were very generous. The 1772 Foundation, which is based in New Jersey, gave us a significant amount of money for the film. So people were very supportive of the project. And I do think we should say the name Yusuf Hawkins.
Oh, yes.
I think we should say the name.
Yeah.
And so many others, right?
Put it in the chat. I just wanted to say it.
Yeah.
Okay.
He definitely was, I think, really close in time. But Michael Griffith was the one who was chased out into the middle of the street and got hit by a car. Yusuf was sort of, beat with bats and I think shot.
Those are the distinctions we're making.
Right. These are right. Well, I tell you, one quick thing, because of what had happened to Michael Griffith and Yusuf Hawkins, when Ahmaud Arbery, I'm a runner, and so that was really poignant to me because I was like, I've run through neighborhoods all the time that perhaps I should not be in, or somebody could deem that I shouldn't be. And the fact that somebody could get in their, pickup truck and hunt him down, you know what I mean? So the distance that he had run from his home was 2.3 miles. And so a lot of runners started running 2.3 miles and posting, because, runners like to post, stats of their runs. So started posting the stats of their runs on their various GPS devices. And so I knew I wanted to do that. And I specifically went to Howard Beach. I specifically went to New York's version of a sundown town to run my 2.3, miles, just out of respect for Maud, and also just, I was afraid of Howard Beach when I was a kid, and I was like, I'm a grown man now. I'm not afraid, of your sundown town, anymore, Plus, I thought I was faster than anybody could chase me, so I was pretty sure I was going to get out,
Okay.
You can run faster than a pickup truck?
I don't think that people have pickup trucks in New York City.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you for that. I also want to give a special thanks to Sue DeBrine, again, who brought the book Driving While Black to our attention in the first place. And without her doing so, we would not have gotten the introduction to Gretchen. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like my life has changed immeasurably, and I'm so grateful. I'd like to thank our director, Heidi Kramer, and who's encouraged and supported this program and the one before it, and all of my coworkers who are working behind the scenes, Kate Baker, Doug Baldwin, Kathleen DeJulo, Suzanne Henning, Erica Krivapala, and Melissa Schabel. Again, this is obviously not a one-person operation. We're all a team, and just as you are a team, and you're an amazing team, and we are so grateful that you, as tired as you are, having accomplished what you did, that you took time tonight to join us and to share with us. Just an amazing, amazing accomplishment. And I'm hopeful that when the sequel comes out, or when the next book comes, you'll think of us again, and keep in touch. We're fascinated to know what comes next. My mom wanted me to ask you whether you're submitting it for any awards.
The documentary?
Yes. Do you? I don't know what that process is, but will you be doing that? Is that something that you'll?
Emily?
Are you going to answer that question, somebody?
Yeah, I would say we plan to, yes. Now that the air date has happened, we can think about that.
Excellent.
But yes, definitely.
Excellent. And on that happy note, I hope you win many, many, many awards, because it is well deserved. And I think the audience will concur, right? Well, again, thank you so much. I'll try and clean up some of those errors in post, and maybe make sure that you all get your credit in the YouTube, the description, to make sure that everyone acknowledges and knows and acknowledges the work that you did. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for sharing. Good night, everyone. Thank you to our audience.
Joy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us, Joy. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Here. Bye, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Be safe. Be well.
Good night.
Get some rest.